Chapter 5. You think Mackenzie's a natural? Leah cut straight to the chase the moment we stepped out of the room. Celine had hung back to talk down the crisis negotiator, the psychologist, and Mrs. McBride. For someone who had a fondness for throwing gasoline on fires, Celine was also surprisingly adept at putting them out. It hadn't been my intention to be inflammatory or reckless. I'd said what I needed to say to show Mackenzie that I was listening. I wasn't just repeating her own words back to her. I understood. Convincing Mackenzie of that had been worth the risk of addressing her threat to jump head on. The fact that I'd succeeded was the only reason that I'd been able to extract a promise that she would sit tight while I made some phone calls. I'd given her something to hold on to. I'd left her in control. There's only one way to find out if she's like us, I told Leah. Feeling different didn't make a person a natural. Believing that you knew things, that you could intuit things that other people couldn't, that didn't make you a prodigy. The only way to tell if Mackenzie was a natural was to find out if she was right. For that, I needed Sloan. Unfortunately, the FBI Academy was not known for allowing its trainees to keep their cell phones on at all times. I circumvented the system and made a different phone call. Briggs. Even now that he was the FBI director, the founder of the Naturals program had a habit of answering the phone with his last name. Efficient and just a little egocentric. I need you to get Sloan on the phone for me, I said, not bothering with hello any more than he had. I also need you to get us access to everything the local PD has on 3 recent teenage deaths. Apparent suicides. The sooner Sloan gets her eyes on those files, the better. Maybe the detective in charge of Mackenzie's case would have handed over the files without receiving a phone call from the director of the FBI. And maybe he wouldn't have. Either way, I wasn't about to devote a single ounce of my attention or brain power to figuring out how to finesse the situation. My cognitive resources were already split, half focused on Mackenzie, power and control and desperation, and the other half working through the few facts that I knew about the trio of deaths. If Mackenzie was right, if I proved it, she'd have a reason to come in. 3 victims, 2 female, 1 male, all teenaged, all local. If these suicides really were murders, then I needed the information in the files as much as Sloan did. How far apart were the deaths time-wise? Were numbers 2 and 3 closer together or further apart than number 1? I knew the 3rd victim was female. If the first had been male, that might suggest a shift in the pattern. The first could have been practice. The next 2, the girls, they might be what you want. Check your phone. Leah had ducked back into the lightroom to check on Celine. Based on the first words out of her mouth when she reappeared on the landing, I concluded that Celine had probably asked her to pass that message along. I pulled out my phone and checked my secure email. The files were there. If I had them, that meant that Sloan had them. Based on the speed with which she worked, I'd be hearing from her soon. Not soon enough. I'd made the decision not to go back into the room until I could convince Mackenzie that I'd done something, that I was doing something. I couldn't go back just to tell her that she had to wait. In the meantime, I had to trust that Celine could handle the adults in the room, and that some part of Mackenzie would have latched on to the way Celine had responded when Mackenzie had described her awareness of her own body, of muscles and movement. I'm that way with faces. I'd gone into this identifying with Mackenzie and laying the groundwork for her to identify with me, but with a little space, I could see that I wasn't the only option on that front. Celine's ability was the closest to Mackenzie's. Celine was the one who moved like a fighter and a dancer, and Mackenzie had mentioned sparring and dancing both. I knew what it was like to survive trauma, but Celine was the one who'd gone to great lengths as a teenager to be seen and heard. She was comfortable with anger. Nobody controlled her. Excuse me. I looked up to see Mr. McBride making his way up the steps. 9 flights of stairs had taken a physical toll on him, but clearly he considered that the least of his problems. "Can you tell me anything?" he asked, breathing heavily. "My wife, my daughter." I took note of the order in which he'd asked. "They're both fine," I said. "Or as fine as they can be, under the circumstances." Mackenzie's father ascended another step, but stopped there, below me. My phone was heavy in my hand. I had the files. I could be looking at them while waiting for Sloane's call. But I knew what it was like to be on the other end of an investigation, and to feel like no one was telling you anything, or listening. For better or worse, I could give him a minute. "What can you tell me about Mackenzie?" I asked. In my line of work, details were currency, and given that Sloane could feasibly call me back and say that the physical evidence was consistent with suicide, I needed a backup plan, one that could bring Mackenzie down off that ledge, even if she was wrong. "Mackenzie's a good girl." Mr. McBride said that stubbornly, like he expected me to argue. When I didn't, he got nervous and pushed his hands through his hair, an alternative to wringing them. "She doesn't like attention. Not like this." "She's more like you than your wife," I translated. I wondered when that shift had happened. Mackenzie McBride had wanted to be a pop star once. She'd loved attention. "Does Mackenzie ever talk about what happened to her?" I asked. That question shut Mr. McBride down, as immediately as if he'd had an actual off switch and I'd pressed it. "I have a little sister," I said, trying another tack. "I didn't know about her for years, until she was 3, almost 4. What she's been through?" I thought of Laurel, of the way that she used to look at swing sets and see shackles and chains. "I won't ever fully understand it." I shook my head. "I don't make her talk about it. Sometimes, though, she says things." I paused, letting the silence work its way through his brain. "Does Mackenzie ever say things to you?" "She said that it was small." Mr. McBride swallowed, visibly, audibly, practically with his entire body. "The place that bastard kept her. She said that it was dark, and it was small, and he'd leave her there for hours, sometimes days." I thought of Mackenzie, standing on a ledge and looking up at the sky. Up, not down. At least on the ledge, there was air. At least you're in control. At least you're free. "She said she danced." That snapped my attention back to Mackenzie's father. "She what?" "She danced," he repeated. "Every day, all the time, whenever she could. Whenever it was dark, whenever she couldn't see anything, whenever she wanted to cry, she danced." I thought about what it would be like to live in a 4x4 room. You were just a kid who liked being the center of attention, a kid who wanted to be a pop star. He took everything away from you. He locked you up. He hurt you. You danced. "The older she gets, the harder it is." Mackenzie's father looked down. "I thought it would get easier, but she understands more now than she used to. The things she lived through." He couldn't finish that sentence. "She dances 5 days a week." Mr. McBride managed a very small smile, fond and hopeful in a way that hit me like a knife to the gut. "Ballet, tap, jazz. A few years ago, she started martial arts. The kid's practically a prodigy. There's nothing physical that she can't do." When it comes to her body, she's in control. "Thank you," I told Mr. McBride. He asked me what I was thanking him for, but I couldn't explain what he'd just told me, what he'd really told me. "If we'd had normal childhoods," Sloane had commented once, a long time ago, "we wouldn't be naturals." Michael had learned to read emotions because he'd needed to be able to read his abusive fathers. Leah had grown up in a world where deception was a matter of survival. Dean's father was a serial killer. I'd had a mother who was a mentalist, and she'd moved us around so frequently that the only relationships I was able to form with other people were in my mind. Mackenzie McBride had been kidnapped at the age of 6. I'd known that she'd been held captive. I'd known the size of the shack. I hadn't known, until this moment, what she'd done to survive. You danced. In the dark, you danced. For hours and hours. When you had no control over anything else, you had control over the motion, over your own muscles, over the decision to repeat the same moves, familiar moves, again and again and again. I suspected, but didn't know, that when Mackenzie had danced, she'd gone to a place in her mind where other things, the bad things, as Laurel would say, couldn't touch her. What I did know was that on the ledge, Mackenzie had said that she knew bodies, knew how they moved, knew what she looked like when she was dancing without ever looking in the mirror. With her childhood, her very not normal childhood, that made sense. Even now, losing herself in motion, exerting physical control, it was a coping mechanism. I'd been trying to approach this objectively. I'd been reserving judgment on whether or not Mackenzie knew things, the way I sometimes did, the way we all did. But now, I said goodbye to Mr. McBride and started up the ladder to the light room. You know bodies. You know motion. I'd thought that I couldn't go back in until I had proof that she was right. But right now, I didn't need proof. I knew. When I made it into the room, the first thing I noticed was that Celine was standing opposite the window, closer to Mackenzie than any of the others. You're back. Mackenzie didn't turn to look at me. I wondered if she'd seen me come into the room or if she'd heard me. How in tune with her environment, with the bodies all around her, was she? My phone rang, the sound almost obscene in the silence that had followed Mackenzie's statement. No matter what damage control Special Agent Delacroix had done with the adults in this room, it was a good bet that none of them quite trusted me or the way I'd chosen to approach things. In their eyes, this was a delicate situation. Mackenzie was delicate and in need of kid gloves. I looked down at my phone, then out at the girl on the ledge. It's my colleague, I said. The expert. The one who'll tell you I'm right, Mackenzie said forcefully. My head wanted to nod, but I forced myself to answer the phone instead. Tell me what you've got, Sloan. Sloan, age 12. 11 years earlier.
She's gotta stop pulling stunts like this, Margot.
Sloan knows that the security guard's usage of the word stunt is a fairly recent linguistic innovation, late 19th century, origin unknown. Personally, she prefers the terms exploit and feat. What was it this time? Sloane's mother is wearing a tight white t-shirt and jeans, not her work clothes. Interesting. Only 15% of Marco Tavish's personal wardrobe is white.
Blackjack tables.
Security keeps the reply brief. Sloan should really learn his name, just like she's already learned the placement of the 36 security cameras in the Majesty, the blind spots, and how to work her way through the casino while minimizing the chances that she'll show up on film. It's harder to hide from the guards. Harder, but not impossible.
She was counting cards.
Security does not sound happy about that.
For other players, Margot. Took 3 hands before we managed to escort her out.
I was not counting anything. Sloan feels like that has to be clarified, even if clarifying it earns her a glare from an annoyed Margot. I was tracking the number and distribution of cards that had already been played in an effort to calculate the individual probabilities of the next card being favorable to either the player or the dealer. Security lets out what Sloan deeply suspects is an exasperated sigh. Sloan has a great deal of experience with other people's exasperation.
No more, Margot. Kid's 12, and she's already persona non grata on the Strip. I don't need to tell you how uncomfortable this could be if word works its way up the chain of command at the Majesty.
Sloane knows the chain of command at the Majesty precisely as well as she knows the locations of the security cameras. That is, after all, the point. To get the owner's attention, to make him see her. Margot puts a hand on Sloane's shoulder and pulls Sloane's smaller body back against her own. Sloane calculates that there is a 12% chance this is a sign of affection. More likely, it is protectiveness. Or possibly a warning. If Shaw says anything, you can tell him that it's not my fault she's a genius. It is not Sloane's mother's fault that Sloane is Sloane. That hurts, and it is not precisely true.
Due to genetic polymorphism?
That is as far as Sloane gets before the security guard takes a step forward toward her mother. The gesture appears quite threatening.
I'm trying to help you out here, Margot. If Shaw wanted your kid around, he'd tell you.
I'm his kid, too, Sloane says. There is a long pause. A 12.35-second pause by Sloane's estimation. Your boss has always been very clear, Margot Tavish whispers finally, about what he does and does not want. Chapter 6.
There are 3 cases.
Sloane had gotten better over the years at easing me into her calculations, but I knew from experience that soon the numbers would be flying fast. Fast was good. Mackenzie wasn't backlit anymore. I hadn't realized it out on the landing, but in a room with a window, it was clear that the sky outside had begun to darken. It looked like it might storm.
The first case I analyzed, Sloane said brightly, was a female, 17 years old, 64 inches tall, approximately 142 pounds fully clothed. She was found in a supine position on uneven ground with a negative 12-degree incline.
No one else could hear Sloane, but I could feel the eyes of every person in the room on me, gauging my reaction. Mrs. McBride, the psychologist, the fireman, the crisis negotiator, Mackenzie.
Photographs of the scene have allowed me to pinpoint the likely launch point. Working backward from the point of impact, taking into account wind resistance, vertical and horizontal distance traveled, and a range estimate for the victim's muscle density,
Sloane. I kept my interruption gentle. Obligingly, my favorite human calculator cut to the chase.
She jumped.
I couldn't let my breath hitch in my throat, or allow even a flicker of surprise to show on my face. Mackenzie was watching. I'd expected Sloane to tell me that the victims had been pushed.
Second case.
Sloane continued in a tone that anyone who didn't know her well might have mistaken for cheerful.
Male, 18, 70.2 inches tall, 131 pounds. Different landing pattern, different launch point on the cliff, different point of impact. Same conclusion.
I wouldn't let my insides lurch. I wouldn't let myself look at Mackenzie out on the ledge. The boy jumped. I'd been so sure that Mackenzie was a natural, that she was right, that I could use that to bring her down off the ledge. Now, when I got off this phone, I'd either have to lie to her or tell her that she was wrong, that I didn't believe her, that I was just like everyone else. You dance 5 days a week. You do martial arts. You exert control over your own body when you feel like you have control of nothing else. Right now, your body is on the ledge. Your body could jump.
Cassie?
Sloane's voice broke through my thoughts.
You didn't ask me about the third victim.
In the distance, I heard thunder. I'd come into this assuming we were working with a ticking clock, but if a storm was rolling in off the ocean, we had to get Mackenzie down. Even someone who had incredible control of her own body could fall if the surface she was standing on got slick. If there was a strong enough wind.
What about the third victim?
I said.
Kelly.
I asked that question because I wanted the still listening Mackenzie to know that I'd tried. I wanted her to know, regardless of the outcome, that I'd gone into this in good faith. Kelly was the only one of the 3 victims Mackenzie had referenced by name. Kelly was the one who mattered to her.
Greater vertical distance traveled, less horizontal,
Sloan rattled off.
Post-mortem x-rays suggest moderate forward rotation, despite a feet-first landing. I modeled a scenario where she stepped off the ledge with 1 foot and shifted weight, leading to a free fall, as well as trajectories with a greater lead-up and initial vertical push. Translation?
I cut in.
The first 2 victims jumped.
Sloan paused.
The third didn't.
I stopped breathing, and then, without warning, the air came whooshing out of my lungs. She was right. Mackenzie was right.
I'd need better photographs of the area surrounding the launch point, as well as a more detailed analysis of weather conditions to rule out a fall, but the most likely conclusion is...
I finished Sloan's statement for her. The third victim was pushed. I shouldn't have felt relieved. No part of me should have been grateful that a teenage girl had been murdered. But the third victim was the only one Mackenzie had actually seen, the one she'd based her conclusion on. She was right, and that meant that I didn't have to tell her that she was wrong. It meant that I'd been right too, about Mackenzie's ability, about the circumstances that had honed it. Mackenzie McBride was a natural.
Kelly didn't jump.
I stated the truth, plainly and loud enough for everyone in this room, and just outside of it, to hear. Mackenzie deserved to know that she was right. She deserved for everyone in this room to know it. She deserved to be told something other than to calm down and breathe. If someone pushed Kelly, my brain snaked its way to the obvious conclusion. We're not just looking at suicide contagion. We were looking at an unsub who'd used a duo of tragic deaths in an attempt to disguise a third. You are the witness, the power, the painkiller, the peace. Strangers have no right to take that, not from you, and not from those you bless. How dare they talk about your work? Outsiders. The thought crawls beneath your skin. What do they know about this town, about its history, about you? Chapter 7.
What are you going to do?
Mackenzie demanded. She was squatting outside the window now. Her neck was bent, her forehead nearly touching the barricade.
We'll open an investigation.
Celine kept her answer to Mackenzie short and to the point.
A murder investigation. Technically, the case won't be federal, but I have a feeling that the local police department will welcome our involvement.
Briggs would make sure of it. As I approached the window, and Mackenzie, I wished Michael was here to tell me exactly what to read into the way Mackenzie finally allowed her forehead to rest against the barricade. Was she tired? Relieved? Now that someone believed her, was the magnitude of what she'd done to get our attention sinking in? I stopped, inches away from her. The room was silent enough that I could hear her breathing. Outside, the sky was still painted in shades of gray, but there was no thunder. No sound at all except for Mackenzie's breathing and the barest whistling of the wind. You'll find out who pushed her, Mackenzie said quietly. That wasn't a question, or a request. I'd expected something like hope in her tone, but I couldn't hear much emotion in it at all. We will. Leah stepped forward. Of the 3 of us, she'd interacted with Mackenzie the least, but she was also capable of speaking with a level of conviction with which an unsuspecting listener simply could not argue. Cassie will start crawling into people's heads. I'll interrogate witnesses, suspects, anyone who gets on my bad side." That got a very small smile out of Mackenzie. "Agent Delacroix will flash her badge around and put the fear of God and the FBI in this whole town," Leah promised. "It will be a sight to behold." If Mackenzie's only reason for crawling out on that ledge had been to make someone listen, the fact that I'd confirmed her belief and Leah's assurances of action would have been enough to bring her in. But thinking back on my conversation with her father, I had to wonder if that was all there was to this. "You survived, you danced, and you've been dancing ever since."
"Mackenzie? Baby!"
Mrs. McBride had been remarkably silent the past few minutes.
"Please."
Mackenzie's mother was the talker in the family.
"I'm sorry I didn't believe you about Kelly. We should have listened. I'm so sorry, but can't you—"
"Don't apologize," Mackenzie interrupted tersely. "It's okay." Beside me, Leah's gaze darted almost imperceptibly toward mine. Mackenzie was lying. It wasn't okay. A lot of things in Mackenzie's life weren't. "Before we can leave," I said carefully, "before we can find the person who killed Kelly." I waited for her to fill in the blank. She had to say it herself. "You need me to come in." Mackenzie didn't sound angry or sad, but there was something in her tone that I recognized, something deep and cavernous, something I'd felt. "You're going to be okay," I told our newest natural, my voice catching in my throat. "Lots of things in your life, things that have happened, things that are going to happen, won't be, but you will." I let that register. No kid gloves, no sugarcoating. "You won't ever be normal, Mackenzie, but you'll be okay." "Personally," Leah commented, "I find normal overrated." I willed Mackenzie to hear us. "We see you. You can come down now. You can come in." "What if you don't catch him?" Mackenzie turned the full force of her attention back to Celine. She looked younger all of a sudden, vulnerable. "The person who pushed Kelly, what if he gets away with it?" "He or she," my profiler brain filled in. "Or they." The possibilities were myriad, and I could start sorting through them just as soon as Mackenzie was in. "Sometimes you win," Celine replied evenly, taking Mackenzie's question at face value. "Sometimes you lose, but I can promise you that we will fight like hell for Kelly. And our track record?" Celine pressed her palm flat against one of the boards. Not the one Mackenzie was leaning against. Not too close. "It's not exactly normal." "You're different, Mackenzie, but so are we. We see you. You aren't alone." "You're good at what you do?" Mackenzie's voice was hoarse. "We found you, didn't we?" Leah's tone bordered on flippant, but somehow that made her words sound less like a rhetorical question and more like an inviolable, uncontested, naked truth. "You won't ever be normal, but you'll be okay." "You can trust them, Mackenzie." That statement came from behind me. The psychologist. I'd almost forgotten she was there, that there was anyone in this room besides Mackenzie and the three of us. "We've talked about trust, haven't we?" That was the exact wrong thing to say. I caught Mackenzie's gaze with my own, willing her to look at me, and at Leah and at Celine. "We're not humoring you. We're like you." Before I could say that, Quentin Nichols stepped forward. "You tell us when you're ready for us to remove the barricade," the crisis negotiator said. "You're the one in control here, Mackenzie. It's your decision." Emphasizing her control of the situation was a good move. It was the right move, one I might have made if he'd given me the chance. But he hadn't, and my gut said that the words would sound different to Mackenzie coming from him. "He's male,"
Stay back! Mackenzie jerked her head off the board, so suddenly that I was afraid it might send her flying backward. It didn't. You don't get to give me control. You don't get to stand there and say...
Breathe, Mackenzie, the psychologist murmured behind me. I snapped so Mackenzie didn't have to.
She's already breathing. She's fine.
But I knew. You're not fine, Mackenzie. You haven't been fine in a very long time. Something had triggered her, taken her back to a place she didn't want to go. She was fighting that, would fight it, tooth and nail. As long as Mackenzie stayed where she was in control. On the ledge, it was her body, her choice, her life. Her eyes stared past me, past Leah, past Celine, past her own mother. Straight to the psychologist, and then to Quentin Nichols. You're small, and he's not. He has power, and you don't. Mackenzie took a step backward. It was a small one, but...
Mackenzie,
Celine said calmly.
I need you to stand very still.
I slid sideways, blocking Mackenzie's view of the men in the room as best I could. The fireman, at least, had the presence of mind to keep his mouth shut. I didn't trust Quentin Nichols to do the same. Mackenzie probably wasn't his first jumper. This wasn't his first rodeo. But whether he saw it or not, she was different. A clap of thunder boomed in the distance. Mackenzie raised her head to the sky. Her body didn't shake. She didn't waver.
You need me to stand still, she repeated back to Celine. And I need you to find the person who murdered Kelly.
This is control. This is setting your own terms.
How are we supposed to find the killer if we have to stay here and babysit you?
Leah didn't pull her punches. She wasn't a profiler, but she did have a history of trauma and a deep-seated loathing for being treated like she was traumatized.
You don't have to stay,
Mackenzie said fiercely.
I can take care of myself.
We'd been so close to her coming in. If it had been just us in the room, we could have done it. I sure as hell wasn't leaving her alone with the people who'd botched this enough to keep her out there. This is control. I wanted to believe that we could undo the damage, talk her down, but everything inside me said that now that she'd set her terms, she'd stick to them. Your body, your life, your choice.
I'll stay.
I'd been on the verge of saying those words, but Celine beat me to them.
I'll stay with you,
she repeated, her focus solely on Mackenzie.
And Leah and Cassie will work the case.
Fine. Mackenzie's voice was like steel, as a gust of wind whipped her tawny brown hair against her face. She stared at Celine for a moment longer, then turned to Leah and me.
You do your jobs,
she promised.
You find Kelly's killer, and I'll come down.
You. There are names for what you do. Mercy is one, but another is art.
Chapter 8. I thought that went well.
From the passenger seat of our government-issued SUV, I glared at Leah. I knew she was just pushing my buttons, because the more she pushed them, the less mental space I could devote to how I could have played things differently with Mackenzie. Why we'd failed. Walking away, leaving her out on that ledge, was hard, bordering on impossible. I could still see the way Mackenzie had looked from the base of the lighthouse. Small, still. She was little more than a silhouette against the darkening sky. Down below, the ocean churned, angry and haphazard as it bored into the jagged shore. The storm was getting closer. We didn't have long. Are you ignoring your phone on purpose, or is it just a side effect of the brooding? Leah managed to sound genuinely curious about the answer to that question. I looked down at my phone. 3 new text messages, all from Celine. Agent Delacroix keeping busy? Leah asked archly.
Apparently, she's been making some calls.
It didn't surprise me that Celine was still coordinating the investigation, even though she was the one who'd volunteered to stay behind. Objectively, Leah and I had skill sets that were more useful when it came to talking to witnesses, but Agent Delacroix was the one with the badge. She was the one that Mackenzie was currently watching and listening to. Showing the little natural that the case was moving would be more effective than anything anyone in that room could say to keep Mackenzie calm.
Celine was able to get in touch with Kelly's parents, I told Leah. They're anxious to speak with us.
I rattled off the address Celine had sent, then turned my attention back to my phone. Not to the texts, to my inbox and the files. I had the length of this drive to read through Kelly's. Before we talked to our victim's parents, I needed to get acquainted with her. Her last name was Peterson. That was one of the many things I learned en route, as I skimmed the file once and read it again. You were a senior at Cape Roan High School, straight-A student, doctor parents, no siblings. A quick perusal of her social media accounts told me that she had a propensity for standing in the middle of every picture. Based on the photographs her many public mourners were posting, she also had a tendency to come to school wearing workout clothes, like she simply couldn't have been bothered to change after she hit the gym. Her face was fully made up in every single picture. But the thing at the forefront of my mind as Leah and I climbed the steps to the Petersons' front porch wasn't the way Kelly had looked in those pictures. It was the way she'd looked in the autopsy photos.
Thank you for meeting with us.
I sat opposite Kelly's parents in their formal living room. The walls were tastefully decorated with a mix of abstract art and high-quality portraits. Some of the whole family, some just of Kelly. Now that their daughter was dead, the moments captured in time were haunting. But the impression that I couldn't shake was the association between the portraits and the paintings. Kelly as decoration. Kelly as art. Of course. Kelly's father was the one who replied, but the way his hand was woven through his wife's made it seem like the words were a joint effort. The doctors Peterson were type A, good-looking, driven, but whatever else they were or were not, I was certain that they'd loved their daughter. The agent on the phone said that there was a development in Kelly's... Isaac Peterson didn't seem the type to stumble over words, but he hesitated just long enough for his wife to fill in. Case. Not Kelly's death, not suicide or even murder. Her case. It felt like a euphemism, as pristine as the formal white couches on which the 4 of us sat. Leah leaned forward slightly. We have reason to believe that your daughter didn't jump. Leah knew Celine had told the parents that much. It was why they'd agreed to meet with us, but it was also our strongest entry to what would doubtlessly be a difficult conversation. I knew it, Kelly's mom bit out. I knew that our little girl... She drew in a ragged breath. Now it was her husband's turn to finish her sentence. We knew that Kelly couldn't and wouldn't have killed herself. We told the police as much, but they're used to parents being biased when it comes to their children. The subtext there told me that Dr. Isaac Peterson considered himself, above all, an objective and rational person. I filed that away for future reference, but paid more attention to the way that Leah tapped 2 fingers, middle and index, lightly against the side of my leg. The signal was subtle, but unmistakable. She'd caught a lie. We knew that Kelly couldn't and wouldn't have killed herself. Dr. Alice Peterson might have believed that, but her husband was the one who'd spoken those words, and he did not. No matter what he'd told the police, no matter how objective and rational his tone, he'd doubted his daughter. He'd believed she'd jumped. My mind went to the autopsy. Not the photographs documenting the damage wreaked by impact, but the close-up shots of Kelly's lower abdomen. Scars, small, deliberate half-moons, had stretched from one of Kelly's hip bones to the next, too low to show unless she was naked. "Were you aware that Kelly was a cutter?" I asked Kelly's father. I knew the question wouldn't be a welcome one, but I needed to get to know Kelly well enough to crawl into her head, and I needed any information, no matter how seemingly insignificant, that might give me insight into her killers. "Kelly put a lot of pressure on herself." Alice Peterson seemed to consider that a full and sufficient response to my question. "She was very driven." "A perfectionist," her husband added, sitting ramrod straight. "She was perfect." Alice's voice cracked. I glanced at Leah, but she gave no indication that Kelly's mother was lying. Whether or not Alice Peterson had believed her daughter was flawless when she was alive, now that she was gone, she was perfect. Grief had a way of warping perceptions. "Tell me about Kelly," I suggested gently. That was all it took to open the floodgates for both Dr. Petersons. How beautiful Kelly was, how smart. The fact that she'd applied early to an Ivy League university, the number of times she'd made homecoming court, how mercilessly she'd been able to dismantle her opponents in debate. As the Petersons described their perfect daughter, I thought back again to Kelly's scars. You didn't cut your wrists, your legs, or even your stomach. You sliced below your panty line. She'd literally hidden her pain, preserving the image. If you had killed yourself, I thought, slipping into her mind, you wouldn't have wanted a closed casket funeral. She wouldn't have wanted to mangle the body she left behind. You wouldn't have jumped. "Did Kelly have any rivals?" I asked. "Was there anyone she'd had conflict with? Any issues socially?" "Kelly was very social," her father said immediately. "Everyone loved her." Another tap on my leg, another lie. Even in grief, Isaac Peterson knew quite well that his daughter had not been universally beloved. "You can't think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt her?" Leah pressed. "Kelly didn't always get along with other girls." Alice pursed her lips. "They could be so jealous." That was a loaded statement if I'd ever heard one. "And boys?" I asked. "They all wanted to date her," Isaac said immediately. He shook his head. In memory? In denial? "I'm guessing she had to turn a lot of would-be Romeos down." Leah gave no indication of how carefully she was studying their responses to that statement. "Was that hard for her?" The answers came in tandem. "I think so." "Of course." 2 taps from Leah. Neither one of them thought Kelly disliked turning people down. "It wasn't her fault," Alice said suddenly, leaning toward us. "What happened with the Summers boy? He was obviously very ill." I took a moment to connect the dots. Before Kelly's death, 2 of her classmates had killed themselves. One was a boy. The Summers boy? "Kelly knew the boy who jumped?" I asked. "This is Cape Roan," her father said dismissively. "Everyone knows everyone." And everyone loves Kelly. I echoed his earlier lie silently back at him. "What about the other victim?" I asked. "The girl. Did she and Kelly know each other?" There was a long pause. "Have you been talking to the school?" Alice Peterson couldn't have bristled more if she were actually feline. I took that to mean that someone at the school might have had something less than flattering to say about her perfect daughter. "Was Kelly ever bullied?" I asked. That was an easier question for a parent to be asked than, Was your daughter ever accused of bullying someone else?
There were tiffs, of course.
Kelly's mother relaxed slightly.
But nothing major. Kelly knew who she was. She wasn't the type who needed anyone's approval.
Kelly's father squeezed his wife's hand.
I will say, he told me carefully, that the last few weeks were very hard on our daughter.
The last few weeks? Since the Summers boy jumped off a cliff? Since another of Kelly's classmates did the same? My gut said that if I pushed either of them on that point, they would end this interview. So I sidestepped.
The police file on Kelly's death indicated that she had no defensive wounds.
That, along with the other suicides and Kelly's history of self-inflicted injuries, was what had biased the police in favor of the suicide interpretation.
That suggests, I explained, that whoever pushed Kelly didn't physically engage her beforehand. She wasn't dragged up to the steeple.
I kept my tone gentle to counteract the words.
Unless her attacker had a gun, the most likely explanation is that she went willingly.
Maybe someone coerced you into going up there, blackmailed you, guilted you. I sorted through the possibilities, one by one. Or maybe the person who pushed you was someone you trusted. Maybe you went willingly because you wanted to be alone with that person. Or maybe you went on your own and your killer followed.
Would Kelly have gone up there on a dare? I asked. Or for privacy, or to meet someone?
Alice bowed her head slightly, the motion more graceful than it should have been.
I don't know. Is there anyone she might have trusted enough to go,
"We don't know"?
Isaac Peterson repeated his wife's sentiment, and I had the distinct sense that of everything that had passed their lips during this interview, these words hurt the most. You thought you knew your daughter, but you've realized since she died how much you don't and didn't know.
Is there anyone else we should talk to? I asked. Anyone Kelly might have confided in? Anyone she was close to?
That line of inquiry seemed to center Kelly's parents. Alice folded her free hand neatly in her lap, the other still woven through her husband's.
Kelly had a lot of friends, she declared.
Kelly was popular. Kelly was perfect. Kelly was loved.
In fact,
Alice Peterson continued, her voice shaking slightly,
the pastor called to let us know that a group of students from the high school are planning a vigil for her tonight at the church.
There's something about heights, something pure and true. There's clarity in those final moments. You'll feel it again soon. Chapter 9. As I stepped out of the Petersons' house, the humidity was a visceral reminder that this wasn't an ordinary case. It's going to rain. We weren't on an ordinary timeline, and the insight I'd been able to glean about our victim from her parents, it wasn't enough. I couldn't let myself spare more than a passing thought for Mackenzie or the lighthouse, or the angry wind whipping my hair against my face as Leah and I made our way back to the car. I had to focus. I pulled myself into the passenger seat, shut the door, and let my mind linger on a single word. You. Not Mackenzie this time, and not the killer. Not yet. Kelly. Knowing her, how she would have reacted, the limited circumstances in which she would have climbed to the top of the steeple of her own free will, who she might have done that with, that was a piece of the puzzle I needed. Behavior, personality, environment. Victims and killers' BPEs were intertwined. A cell phone rang then, pulling me from my thoughts. As Leah started the car, and I reflexively buckled my seatbelt, I slipped my phone from my pocket with my free hand, then realized it wasn't ringing. Leah's was. She answered it and flipped the audio to speaker. "Hey, boy wonder." On the other end of the line, Michael responded with all the dignity he could muster. "I appreciate a good Batman reference as much as the next person, but clearly, if I were a character in that particular fictional universe, I would be Batman, not Robin." He didn't give Leah the chance to gainsay him before continuing. "Hypothetically, on a scale from thrilled to ecstatic, how delighted would you be if Batman commandeered a private plane, left a pleasantly worded note for the fine folks at Quantico, and made his Batway to the lovely town of Cape Roan to battle evildoers at your side?" "Michael!" I beat Leah to a response, but didn't get more than his name out before she cut in. "Hypothetically speaking, have you already done and/or are you in the process of doing all of the above?" "Absolutely not." Leah rolled her eyes. "Liar." She turned toward me. "I'm going to need directions to the church." "Spiritual awakening?" Michael asked her. "Impending vigil for our murder victim," I corrected. It took all of 3 minutes for me to get Leah the directions and catch Michael up to speed on the case. All of it. Mackenzie. What she'd seen when she looked at Kelly's body. The stakes for our newest natural now. Kelly. Her parents. "Let's face it," Leah cut in. "Grief turns everyone into liars. It doesn't, however, make you a good liar. And our victim's parents, her father in particular, were very, very good." She paused. "If I were anyone else, I would have fully believed that he'd never so much as entertained the idea that his daughter had killed herself. And the wife?" Leah pressed her foot on the gas, reminding me for the umpteenth time why I really needed to stop letting her drive. "She totally didn't buy that any tiffs Kelly had had with her classmates were because other girls were just so jealous." "Translation?" Michael asked. "Far be it from me to act like a profiler," Leah replied. "But, and I say this as someone who has deeply embraced the title of lovable bitch, I deeply suspect that Kelly Peterson played to win, and played for keeps." "She was competitive," I confirmed, "with herself and with other people. I don't know that I would go so far as to call her a lovable bitch." "You say tomato," Leah commented. "I say tomato." "You are in pain, Kelly. You hid it. Did you cut down others deliberately, precisely, the way you cut yourself?" Most people tended to turn aggression either inward or outward. There was bleed over, but it was somewhat rare to find a person with equal proclivities for both. Power, pain, perfection. I knew Kelly now better than I had before, but it still wasn't enough. "I sense a disturbance in the force," Michael observed on the other end of the phone line. "Heavy silence of the emotionally laden variety." "Cassie's composing a mental poem," Leah told him. "Ode to a profiler's angst." "I'm trying to figure out if Kelly was the type of person who would have climbed the steeple on her own," I corrected, "or if someone else led her up there." Power, pain, perfection. It wasn't hard for me to imagine Kelly making the climb, because she could, because, on some level, it might hurt. Did the killer take you by surprise? Or, I thought, picturing the aftermath of Kelly's impact with the ground in my mind, was it his or her idea? I could feel the shift coming. This wasn't just about Kelly anymore. I was hovering around the edges of someone else's subconscious. The unsubs. The unknown subjects. The killers. "We're about a minute out from the church," Leah informed me, and Michael. "When do you land, Bat Boy?" "Batman," Michael loftily corrected. "And 15 minutes, give or take. Might I suggest that until then we handle this old school?" "Old school as in sneaking out of the FBI Academy like an unruly teenager and opting to ask for forgiveness instead of permission?" Leah asked innocently. All things considered, that was probably a pretty accurate depiction of what Michael had done when he'd realized that the case we were working now had ties to one of our old ones. Michael cleared his throat. "I was thinking more along the lines of old school, as in making liberal use of video surveillance." When we'd first started out, the only way we'd been given access to witnesses was through a video feed, courtesy of our FBI handlers. "Call me sentimental," Michael continued, "but it would hit me right in the feelings if my favorite deception detector could deal me in for old time's sake while I'm in transit. Just think about it, Zhang. You, poking around the vigil, asking questions and listening for lies. Me on the lookout for anyone who's not grieving nearly as much as they'd like us to believe." "Be still, my heart." No one could deadpan like Leah. "I will surely be unable to control the animal attraction this nostalgia will provoke." I snorted, but all things considered, Michael's suggestion wasn't a bad one. It wasn't unusual for killers to return to the scene of the crime, or to attend funerals, wakes, vigils, or other occasions marking the passing. And if you are there, triumph, anger, adrenaline, guilt. The range of emotions Michael would be on the lookout for was wide, but I had every confidence he could spot it. "And what is Cassie going to be doing while we take this trip down memory lane?" Leah threw the question out there, as much for my benefit as for Michael's. If we'd had the time, I might have joined them, but the clock was ticking. We needed every advantage we could get. "I'm going to get a feel for the crime scene and start a profile on the killer," I said. And that was my cue to call Dean. Dean, age 12. 11 years earlier.
"How are you doing, son?"
Dean stares at the FBI agent. What are the chances that Agent Briggs isn't thinking about how Dean is doing? What are the chances that he's thinking about what Dean has done? Fine. Fewer words are better. Dean learned that pretty quickly after his father's arrest. Yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. Yes, sir, and no, sir. And not causing trouble. Not that it helps. "You're fine," Agent Briggs repeats, eyeing the bruise on Dean's cheekbone. "It doesn't hurt." Dean isn't lying. The pain is there, but it can't touch him. That's part of being what he is, isn't it? A lack of sensitivity to pain, to fear, to feeling. Dean wonders, sometimes, if that's how it started for his father. Every day, he remembers the feel of the knife in his hand, the smell of burning flesh.
"You did what you had to do, Dean. If you hadn't played your father's game, if you hadn't convinced him you wanted to play, he would have killed Veronica."
Special Agent Tanner Briggs is awfully forgiving for someone whose wife's flesh is now branded with Dean's initials.
"You hurt her so that he'd leave you alone with her."
Don't tell me I helped her escape. Don't tell me I'm the reason she's alive. Don't tell me I'm the reason my father is behind bars. He's a monster. So am I.
"Is someone giving you a hard time?"
Briggs tries again.
"Because of your father?"
I should go. Dean is 12. He's not stupid. He knows that people want to say that they've done what they can for him. He knows, even at 12, that there's nothing anyone can do.
Wait.
Agent Briggs doesn't touch him, but Dean has to push down the instinct to react like he has. No one touches me. No one should touch me. If Dean doesn't let people touch him, if he doesn't touch back, he can't hurt them. He can't become his father.
There's something else I wanted to talk to you about,
Agent Briggs says suddenly.
A case.
Suddenly, Dean can hear himself think again. Like my father's?
Not exactly.
Briggs pauses.
The unsub, unknown subject, that we're currently tracking has killed at least 3 prostitutes in the last 8 weeks.
How? The question echoes in Dean's mind, again and again, until he has to ask it out loud.
The women were beaten to death.
Beaten bare-fisted? For Dean, the question is automatic. He's already imagining the way the women would have fought back, the way that might have made the person beating them feel. Or with a blunt object.
Neither.
Briggs pauses for just a moment.
Our killer beats women to death wearing gloves.
Dean pictures it. Something gives inside of him, something visceral and hopeful and dark. Maybe he can make a difference. Maybe he can atone. Maybe thinking like a killer is enough.